we're going to look at how to spawn and synchronize things other than the players. So think NPCs or enemy mobs, really anything that you can think of that you want to spawn and synchronize in the game. So that means when someone else joins or plays your game, they will see this object synchronized throughout all the players. So I'm going to start with the brackeys multiplayer game template that I've been working with. So if you want to follow along, clone the repository link below. And if you want to clone the repository, it's actually going to link down to this enhancements branch, which is just an improvement on some of the things I've made to just make for a better implementation. Now that you've got the project open, let's create a new scene. So under the scenes folder, I'm going to right click and create new scene. I'm going to call it slime spawn. And oftentimes, like I just did, I forget to select the correct type. So if you right click and change type, let's just make this an area 2D. Awesome. Next, let's create a script. So with it selected under the script tab, let's select new script. And I'm going to move it to the scripts folder. And to give you an idea of what I plan on doing, hit the 2D tab. And if we scroll in here, what I want to do is right around this coin, I want to add some type of trigger so that when the player hits that trigger, it's going to spawn a mob right about here and he's going to drop in. And so it's going to give us another slime to just fight with that will go back and forth right in this area. So right off the bat, we know we need some type of point to mark where we want the slime to spawn. And we also need a place to mark where we want that collision detection to be, or that on body entered, or whatever you want to call it, so that when the player hits it, we have that trigger kick off that will actually spawn the slime. So that's what we want to do here. So I want to add some kind of detection here for that. So let's drag the slime spawn scene up into our game scene. And it's going to complain that we need to add a shape 2D. So let's go ahead and do that. I should say collision shape 2D. And I want to use this segment shape right here, and I put it right at the origin, but I want to move it right over to the coin area. So let's just drag it over there. So right about here. And if I zoom in a little bit, let's expand it. You can kind of see there's like a green bar. It's really hard to see on the screen, but if I drag it down, you can kind of see it. So this is where the collision is going to occur. That's going to trigger the slime to spawn, but I want the slime to spawn like right over here. So I'm going to add a marker to represent that. So let's do marker 2D. I'm going to name it slime spawn location. So we need a way to reference the slime spawn location. So let's head back over to the slime spawn scene or the attached script, and let's add a variable to capture that. And now if we click on our slime spawn, we can see we have a spawn location. So I'm going to just drag that spawn location right there. And if we go back to our map, let's select the slime spawn location, and you can see it's back at the origin. We actually need to move that, and I'm going to move it right about there. So I want the slimes to just drop in right here, and then they're just going to go back and forth in this space here. Okay, so we have our collision point where the player is going to trigger a spawn, and then the point at which the slime will spawn into the world right here. So let's go back to the script. So we have our collision shape in our world that marks where the player will interact to spawn the slime, but we need to create a callback for that, or a signal for that. So let's create a function on body entered. And I'm going to add a print statement to acknowledge that we had something collide with that collision area. So we need to wire up this on body entered function to the slime spawn object. So because that's an area 2D, let's select the node tab, and on body entered, let's connect it with our, scroll down to the slime spawn object, pick that, and then select the on body entered that we just created. Hit OK, connect. And you can see this little green icon indicates that we have a successful connection between our slime spawn and our script, which means when a player collides with the shape that we derived through the collision shape, this up and down object right here, it will trigger this function to get hit. So let's test that out really quick. So let's make sure, let me see how many debug tabs I have. One's good enough for now. So right here, you should, wait, it's not colliding. Well, of course it's not colliding because we need to set the correct mask. So over under the slime spawn object, under the collision tab, you need to select mask 2. So that's the layer that brackeys had set up earlier so that when it collides with things like the slime or the kill zone basically is what's going on behind the scenes, it will correctly detect that. And if you want to take a look at that, hit the kill zone object and look under the collision tab and you can see that the mask is on 2. So let's run it again. Post new game. And you can see there slime spawn hit by 1. So that's exactly what we expect. Our player is hitting that collision shape and it's calling this function. Excellent. So what we want to do now is spawn the slime into the game. So I'm going to create a function called create slime. And we need to get a reference to the slime scene. Now we could create a separate slime scene to represent the multiplayer version that we want to synchronize, but I just want to keep things simple. So I'm just going to reuse the existing one that brackeys had created for us originally. So now that we have a reference to the slime scene under our create slime, we can create it or instantiate it. Let's call instantiate on it. And now we want to set the position to our spawn location. So if we remember back in the 2D tab, we have this marker right here to represent the spawn location with this slime spawn location object here. And of course, we have a reference to it right here. Remember how we dragged that over there earlier. So we're going to grab that position and set it to our slime so we know where to put them in the game. All right, so our slime will be instantiated and then it's going to have its position set to the spawn location of the 2D marker right here, which we have reference to our slime, a slime scene right there that we've dragged over to the spawn location. But before we can actually add the slime to the scene, we need to create a holder object so that it can be spawned and synchronized correctly to all of the players who are connected to the game. So back under the game scene, let's create another node 2D. And let's call it slime spawn node. And then if we go back under the slime spawn scene, we need to add a multiplayer spawner. Let's rename it slime spawner. And we're going to leave the spawn path empty because we are going to manually assign it later. Leave the spawn limit to 0 so that we don't really have a limit. And then under the auto spawn list, hit add element. And what we're going to do is select the slime scene. And if you're not familiar with the multiplayer spawner, what this is going to do is if this multiplayer spawner detects this object being added to the spawn path, it will automatically spawn and synchronize that to all connected clients. So let's add the slime scene to our spawn node. But before we do that, we need to get a reference to it. So up here, let's type export var slime spawn node. And of course, that's a node 2D. And then back under the 2D scene, the game scene, I should say, select slime spawn. And you can see there's another option there for the slime spawn node. Let's just drag that one we just created to it. Great. So now our script and our slime spawn scene will know where to put the slime. So I'm going to copy paste that down here. Let's add child. And we'll add slime to spawn. And make sure you put true here so that it gives it a readable name. It just won't really work without that. Okay, so now when the player hits that collision shape, let's make a call to create slime. Now, I know this is going to cause a problem, but I just wanted to show you really quick before we run it. So let's go ahead and hit play. And if I come over here and hit this, you can see that he does spawn and he just kind of like floats out in space. That's fine. We're going to fix that later. But we do have an exception down here. Oh, he's coming back. That's funny. He must have hit something else. It says use call deferred because you can't change the state while flushing queries. So that's just some fancy speak that we need to make sure that we wrap this call in a call deferred. And we'll just put the function name in quotes. And let's run it again. And there it goes. And we don't see any more exceptions, so we know that worked properly. Great. So you saw our slime kind of float away. Well, let's make it so he spawns and then drops in and then hits the ground and then just goes back and forth in that area. So what I want to do is open up the slime scene. And you can see we have some ray casts right here that determine whether or not he's going to go right or left. I want to have another ray cast that points straight down so that he knows when he's actually on the ground before going back and forth. So let's look at how to do that. So first I want to just add another ray cast called raycast down. So select raycast 2D. Let's name that raycast. I'm going to name it ground. And if we open up the 2D panel and let's zoom into our character, because we got to get this right. There's some issues with how this collision gets detected. So if this is longer, it will get detected much earlier, but I want him to detect a collision right before he hits the ground. I don't want him to just stop moving. So to get it set right, what I want to do is set the transform to something like -7, and the target position is going to be at 10. So that should give us, I've done some experimentation, and that should be about appropriate to what we need to get him to stop right before the ground. You can adjust this to make it work for your game. So if we go back to the slime script, let's create another reference, except this time it's going to be to the raycast ground. Drag over reference. And let's wrap the movement back and forth code with a check to make sure that we're grounded before we begin moving. And we can just shift all this in. So if they haven't hit the ground yet, then we need to move him downward. So we need to move him towards the ground until he actually hits it. So let's just update his position. I think something like 0.25 might be fast enough to get him in an appropriate speed. So let's just try it out. So as soon as he detects that he hits the ground, he'll stop moving downward and just move left and right. And if I test this out a little bit, you'll notice that things kind of spawn at different times. Like sometimes I hit one, so I died. So you'll see that they're spawning really quickly, and then all of a sudden they kind of slow down for a minute. So that's why we use delta to really make sure that we're applying the speed evenly, because it's basically a time snapshot between, or the time elapsed between frames. So when you apply a delta to whatever the value is that you want to update, it will even them out between frames so that you'll have a smooth transition downward. So you won't see them, once we apply the delta, you won't see them spawning and shooting to the ground at different rates, because we'll normalize that with that delta. It's actually a really good representation of how delta should work. But if you'll notice, he's barely moving now, so we need to up this to like 100. I think 100 is what I found to work well. Yeah, so he should always just come at that same rate. You won't see him slow down or speed up or anything like that. I mean, you can really just keep spawning as many guys as you want, and I would not jump in there. But here we go. Okay. So now we've got that working, but before we go out of this script, I want to make a small improvement. If you want to really have the slimes look smooth, you can use a lerp. So let's take this position Y and let's equal to lerp. And what this is going to do is just smooth out where he was to where he's going at a weighted value, so that his falling to the ground doesn't look as static across different screens. So let me just type out position Y. So that's our from, and then we're going to go to, so this is where he's going. So we kind of need to copy what we just did here, but we need to make an adjustment. So it's position Y plus, and then I'm going to do 100 times delta. And then we need to assign a weight right here. And I'm going to say 0.8. I think that's a healthy lerp value, or a healthy weighted lerp. It just makes sure that the slime player, or the slime character, falls smoothly to the ground. And I think it's a nice touch. Okay. Okay, so I think at this point we are ready for a test for multiple clients. So I'm going to run 2 clients. Okay, so if we do a test, I'm going to run a host. And let's jump up here and we'll connect it to a client, to the host. And if we trigger that, if you look down in the logs, you'll notice that we have 2 hits here registered by 1 player. And we don't really want that. We want it to be 1 trigger for 1 player. So we have an issue here. So let's go back to our code really quick and try to figure out why that got hit twice, why that collision shape got triggered twice. So if we go back to our slime spawn code, this on body. So what that means is this is getting triggered twice. So in order to only have it triggered once, I want to make this check server side or server authoritative, so that the creation of the slime and the spawning of the slime only occurs on the server and then is synchronized throughout all the clients. So to do that, let's wrap this create slime call with a check to is multiplayer authority. And I'm going to copy this print statement down here so that we know that it should only show up once. So when the player hits that location on the map, it's going to check to make sure that we are the authority, which in this case is our host or server. And then it'll hit the create slime function and spawn that slime on the server side only. So let's double check to make sure that that's working. So we got our host. Player 2 comes in. And you'll notice right off the bat that that slime is only showing up on the server. So we're halfway there, right? So even if I select it with the server, it's only going to show up on the server side. So we need to fix that. So let's grab our ready function and move it to the top because we need to do some configuration there. Select the slime spawn scene. And we need to get a reference to this slime spawner because we need to set the spawn path. Because right now what's happening is the slime is being spawned or being added to the scene right here. But because this is happening on the server side, which we want the spawning of the slime to be server authoritative. But because it's server authoritative and we're adding it to the slime node here, we still have to enable that slime spawner or that multiplayer spawner to automatically synchronize that new slime across all the clients. So in order to do that, we have to set the spawn path, but we don't know what the spawn path is because if you remember back in the game scene, we're just setting it to this slime spawn node, which you may want to change in your game. So I'm allowing it to be, manually configurable as you need because we have it let me find it really quick. I'm not sure why it's not showing up. Oh, because I have this errored out. Let me just comment that out. So if we select the slime spawn without it being aired, you'll notice that there's the spawn location, which we know is where he's going to spawn into the game, and also the slime spawn node. This object represents this right here, and this is where we want the slimes to show up. But because back in the slime spawn scene, because the spawner doesn't know about that, well, we have to manually set it. So in our ready function, let's do that. So if our spawn node is set, let's grab a reference to the spawner. Let's put that right here. And then down here, take that really quick. And then down here, we'll set the spawn path. And then we'll set it to slime spawn node. And then we'll just get the path of that node. And that should do it. And I'm going to print a warning out down here just in case our slime spawn node hasn't been set to let you know that, hey, you got to do that. So now when we add the slime to the spawn node, this slime spawner will detect that spawn path because we set it in our ready, and it should automatically synchronize that to all the connected peers. Let's run the game host and client, and let's just move them over. And let's hit that. So now you can see he spawned in both games, right? But he's not spawning in the correct location. And that's another thing we need to fix. Oh, I died. I hit the slime really quick. But if I hit it on the client as well, you can see that they're both spawning. He's spawning correctly on the server, but he's not spawning correctly on the client. We need to figure out how to fix that. But we know that the multiplayer spawner is working now, which is good because we set the spawn path correctly. So we're almost there. So to actually correct the position of the slime, we need to synchronize it using a multiplayer synchronizer. So let's open up the slime scene. Let's add a new multiplayer synchronizer. You can see it's opened this replication tab. And what we need to do is just synchronize the position, type in position and hit enter. And we want to make sure that the spawn checkbox is checked so that it spawns in with the correct location. And then we always want to synchronize the position. So leave this to always. If I hit it on player 2, you'll notice that he spawns, and let me just line it up so it looks better. So you'll see there he's spawning at the exact location on both clients. So that is working perfectly. So at this point, you could stop and you have a working spawner based on a collision detection point that will spawn a enemy mob or NPC or whatever you want to synchronize in your game. It doesn't have to be a moving object. It can be something like maybe a loot chest or something like this. I think this would work really well for something like that, or maybe like a potion or whatever if you want to pick something up. What I want to do to improve this is I want to add a couple additional functionalities, like how do we kill the spawned object after a few seconds, and also how do we limit it to only spawn one. So let's look at how to do those two improvements. So let's go back under the slime spawn scene, and let's add a function to create a timer that will kill off the slime. So we can clean that up. And let's create a function called create death timer. And we're going to return a timer. It is create a variable called time to live, and let's set it to a timer new. And I'm just going to copy that. And we're going to set the wait time to 2 seconds. You can put this to whatever you want, and you could probably put a constant or make it configurable as a export at the top if you'd like. And this is going to be a one shot. We don't want it to repeat. And we're going to also auto start this when it gets added to the scene. And let's just return that timer. And then under the create slime, right before we add them to the scene, I'm going to add a timer to that slime object. Let's get a reference to our newly created timer. And let's connect the timeout signal to a function in our slime. Slime to spawn.kill slime. And of course we need to create that. So let's jump back over to our slime script really quick. Kill slime. Let's just print that out for debug purposes. And we'll just run a queue free to kill off the slime. So back under the slime spawn script, let's add the timer to that slime. So what'll happen is we create a death timer that will run after 2 seconds. It auto starts once it's added to the scene right here, so that after we add the whole slime object to the game and it's synchronized, in about 2 seconds, it'll fire this timer, and then the timer will call to this kill slime function in the actual slime instance itself, and then remove them from the game. I think that should be enough to get it working. So let's do a test. And if I go over there and trigger them, we should see them, and then you can see they're all dying off. Okay, so let's do it again. There's 1, 2, gone. Great. So let's just make sure it's synchronized on both clients. Boom, done. So the queue free is being called correctly as expected after that timer has expired. So great. So now you have a limit on how long your objects will live. I don't know if you want this or not. This is just something that I wanted to show you just in case you needed that. The next thing I want to look at is how do we disable spawn. So this is going to be nice where if you want to spawn potions or something in the game. So if you have multiple players in some world and all of a sudden a potion or some kind of power up spawns into the game, well, you can totally do this exact same thing and apply this exact same strategy to something like that. But you don't want everybody to just keep picking up potions, right? You want to remove that potion from the game, or once somebody picks up the potion, you don't want somebody else to grab it. So let's just look at one strategy for removing it once it's been touched or once it's been spawned into the game. So let's create a function down here called disable spawn. We're going to grab a reference to the collision shape of the slime spawner. So not the slime itself, but the collision shape that triggers the actual spawning of the slime. If you're wondering where this node came from, it's under the game scene, slime spawn scene right here, this collision shape 2D. So I'm just grabbing a reference to that. And then we're turning it off. So let's turn it off or disable it. Not sure why it's not auto completing that for me. And we're going to make a call to disabled. And I'm using this set deferred method to disable the collision shape because this is the preferred mechanism that they want you to use. The Godot documentation wants you to use to set this type of parameters. Oh, it looks like I have a space. Oh, geez. Okay. Should be correct now. Oh, there we go. Okay. So now we need to call the disabled spawn after a collision has been made initially, right? So where would we put that? So one way you can put it is right here. Again, this is server side. So the call to create slime will occur. So our slime will be created, or your potion or power up or whatever. But if you don't want somebody else to trigger that, add this call to disable spawn, which will disable the collision shape, thus basically removing it at that point from the game. Now, what's really cool is at this point, if you wanted, you could add a timer for like the potion or whatever, or the mob to show back up in like 5 minutes, right? So you could set a kickoff a timer, and then 5 minutes later, boom, that potion or mob would come back into the game. Just make sure that you're doing it from the server authority side. You're setting that timer to kick off on the server or authority side. Otherwise, you'll have all kinds of things and all kinds of problems. So this should disable that mob from spawning again. So let's check it. And we have a problem because I don't know how to spell deferred. Okay, we're back in. We have a host. And let's jump our client up there. And you can see there he spawned in, but they're not spawning anymore. So even if the mob went away, no character is going to be able to interact with that collision shape because we disabled it on the authority or server side in this case, right here. So this is pretty much it for this, but I just wanted to touch on something really quick to kind of wrap your brain around to try to help illustrate why we did it this way. So if we didn't check for this authority, so if this on body entered is hit on both clients, so the peers that are connected to our server, and it's called on our server side, or in this case, our host. So we have both a player and a server running on one machine. So this on body entered is getting called everywhere, but we don't want to be spawning slimes, duplicate slimes. So if we didn't do this check here, we would be spawning multiple slimes per client. And I guess maybe there could be a use case for that, but I would prefer in the case where you're spawning a mob or a potion that you really want it to be server authoritative. So you really don't need that client prediction on something like this. Just wait for your server to correctly spawn and synchronize those potions, those power-ups, or those mobs in this fashion so that you don't call this create slime function on the client side. Just call it from the server authoritative side and just keep it that way. Otherwise, you're going to have duplicates like we saw at the beginning of the video. So you're going to be leveraging the slime spawner here to make sure that it's spawned on the server side. Remember, when we add this slime to the slime spawn node down here, when we add it there with this call to add child, this slime spawner will detect that because you added it to the auto spawn list here. And because we set the spawn path up here, it knows exactly where to go. And when it detects that it's been added, it will synchronize and spawn that to all connected clients. And just to hammer that home for a second, let's disable this disable spawn thing here. And let's up this wait time to 3 seconds just so we can see it. What's really powerful about the slime spawner is that it will synchronize things that were spawned before you even connected, so that if you spawn a mob or something and then you connect in, it will still be there. It'll spawn. And that's a setting that you can actually toggle off if you don't want to use that. But if I host this new game and let's just spawn a bunch of slimes in, and then we'll join as the second player, and you can see that they're actually there and they've DQ'd successfully after that 3 seconds. So we can see that those things are spawned after the fact, even though you joined late to the session. So that's pretty much it for this. It's really simple setup. You're basically using the same exact setup to spawn and synchronize the way that we've been using the spawner and synchronizer with our player characters and synchronizing the position. You know, if you look back under the slime scene, you can see we have that multiplayer synchronizer and we're just synchronizing the position there. I mean, the same principles can be applied with authority and that sort of thing to our slimes or our potions or whatever that can be applied to our players, except the players have some client, authority over the input, whereas in this case it's full server authority. And maybe you would need to make some adjustments there if you had some object that you needed to be able to move from the client side or whatever, but that's a little bit out of scope for this. Before we go, I want to export a dedicated server build, and I'm going to deploy it on an EC2 instance, and just to make sure that we can connect to it from our clients and everything works as expected. So to do an export, go under Project Export, select Add, and whatever operating system you want to export it to. I'm using an EC2 Linux instance, and then select Resources, Export as Dedicated Server, and then Export Project. And I just have a project folder here with some server files already, so I'm just going to override those. Great, so that's it. So I have the client updated to point to the EC2 instance, and I have the game server running here. As you can see, I'm SSH'd in and I've connected and started the dedicated server build there. So we should be able to see players connect. And let's go ahead and run a couple clients. Okay, so let me just pull back the server logs there. Okay, So if I hit join as player 2, now you can see I've joined, and here's that client ID. And let's join as another client, and you can see the other client has joined as well. And let's see if we can spawn some slimes. So yeah, there we go. So it's being synchronized successfully. I don't see any issues with this so far, and they are being removed from the game so that we know our timer's working correctly, we know the spawn, and we know the synchronizer is working. So let me just make sure that we can spawn them with this guy too, and simultaneously. Yeah, so this is great. And just to let you guys know, yeah, we are using the brackeys based multiplayer, which is naive implementation of client movement, meaning when you move on your keyboard, it sends a request to server and then it synchronizes that position back. So you basically have to do this whole round trip before your player is locally moved. If you want to look at another way to do that, where you can give authority over the entire client object and not just the inputs, well, that's what I did in the last video. Just be careful. You only want to do that in certain use cases or certain game type plays or setups, like maybe you're playing with your friends or maybe you have a co-op game or something. Because cheating can become an issue. If you want to do something more standardized, NetFox has an implementation that I did 2 videos ago, I believe, and that uses client-side prediction and server reconciliation. So go check those videos out if you want to learn more about that. But this, again, is going to take, you're going to see some lag if you pull down this demo and use it on a dedicated server, because it is that naive solution where it waits to go to the server and back before that movement is synchronized locally. But anyways, back to the issue at hand here, we can see that our enemies or NPCs or whatever you want spawned in the game are there. I just decided for this demo to use a collision object or a collision shaped based off an area 2D collision. So you may not want to do that. Maybe you want to make it off of a timer or something like that. Or if a player kills something else and an item spawned, well, you can just use this same logic here. It's all the same with spawning and synchronizing. You just use that multiplayer spawner, and then you just add the object that you want spawned with this add child call. And with your multiplayer spawner, it'll detect that and automatically synchronize it through the other peers that are connected. So anyways, that's all I have for you guys today. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe. It is greatly appreciated. If there was something that you saw that you wanted me to do a deeper dive on, please let me know. Or if something I didn't touch on that you want me to cover, also let me know in the comments. Anything that you can add to this discussion, that's greatly appreciated. I appreciate the feedback. And, like most of these videos, they were requested by you guys. So if you do have something that you want me to do, either drop by the Discord or leave a comment below. And I've got a lot more stuff on the way, so please stay connected. Thanks for watching.